If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Kath Bequee. I'm a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I help women feel confident and strong inside out as they navigate pregnancy, birth, and postnatal recovery. Each week, I bring you 2 episodes to support you on your motherhood journey. Whether it's real and raw birth stories from fellow mums, expert interviews with trusted health professionals, or bite-sized Q&As where I answer your most common questions. It is possible to feel amazing in your body during this stage of life, and I want that for you. Come and say hi on Instagram at kathbequee.physio, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello, welcome back to the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. So today's birth story is with Tenae, who I've worked with through Instagram, and also she's a lovely member inside Fitness Mama. And Tenae has 3 lovely children. Her first was born via emergency, and then her subsequent 2 were VBACs. So she shares a little bit about her reasoning behind wanting a VBAC, which is partly due to her experience with the emergency caesarean, which happened right before the pandemic. And she shares, as I said, her experience with the VBAC, but her decision process, obstacles that came up along the way, and she was really truthful and honest in how she navigated the whole thing. And she's really open and honest, and for that I'm really grateful. I do want to preface this conversation today, and I mentioned this in the episode as well, but Tenae is giving her opinions and her experience with a VBAC. And someone listening, or there might be people listening who get triggered by her experience. And I do just want to say, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll know that I am pro-birth, pro all forms of birth. We've got caesarean birth stories on this podcast. We've got vaginal, we've got instrumental, we've got VBACs, and I am pro women feeling empowered and amazing with their experience, which I wholeheartedly believe can happen with any mode of birth. So today is one experience, and Tenae does an incredible job sharing her experience. And if you're considering a VBAC, or if you just love a good birth story, I know you'll love this episode today. Before we do dive in, I do want to say thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. It is a labor of love. I love this podcast so much, and I appreciate all the support you do provide. If you haven't already, if you've loved this podcast and you haven't, please consider doing a rating and review on your podcast app, whether or not that's Apple or Spotify. It just really helps. It's one of the best ways to help this podcast grow, and it can be as simple as just a couple of clicks. And if you want to leave a message, that's amazing too. It's apart from speaking to my amazing guests, it's a pretty solo. You don't hear much from a podcast in terms of, often I do solo episodes and I'm talking into a microphone, and I just love listening to the reviews. So thank you. I appreciate you. And I trust you're going to love this episode today with Tenae. Tenae, thank you so much for joining me on the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. It's so great to be able to finally chat.
Yes, it is. Thank you for having me.
We've been talking about doing this for months now.
Yes. Little kids get in the way of everything sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. So you're a mum of 3. And it's really interesting to chat today because I guess you don't have it's becoming more and more common, but not necessarily the traditional mode of having babies, because you've chosen your second and third of VBACs, which is always interesting to have this chat. So your youngest is now 6 months. How is it being a mother of 3?
It's been awesome. Like, I can't describe it. It's just so beautiful. I feel like I'm where I was always meant to be in life, and he's just fit into the family so perfectly. A lot of people say that with their third, and it's so chaotic at the same time. There was a lot of chaos in the first few weeks. The other kids were very obsessed with him, wanting to be on him all the time, daycare sicknesses being brought home, all of the normal stuff that you deal with. So it was a bit of a transition to go from 2 to 3, more noise, more chaos, everything's doubled, tripled, washing, all of that. But I feel like we're finally finding our groove now in maybe like the last 2 months since he turned about 4 months old. It's been awesome.
And what are the age gaps?
My first is 5. He'll be turning 6 in Feb. And then there's 3 years between him and my daughter, who's 2, and Boya, who's 6 months, my youngest. So there's 22 months between those last 2.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. It sounds like you love motherhood.
I do. I really do. I'm like one of those people since I was a little girl. I just wanted to grow up and be a mum. I don't care about the teenage years and the partying and all that. I just want to be a mum. I just wanted to skip right where I am now. And I think it's everything I thought it would be and more.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Um, did your partner know that from the get-go?
Yeah. I always told him I wanted a big family. He's always known that I've wanted 4 kids. Now he has kids. He's kind of like, I'm finished. I've done it 3. That's enough chaos for me, but we'll see. Watch this space. I'm definitely not done. But yeah, he always
Watch
knew that
this,
about me.
watch this space.
Yes.
Love it. Okay, I would love to ask you about the decision to have a VBAC. Well, first of all, I guess that first of all takes us into your emergency cesarean, which was your first.
Yep.
In a nutshell, how
What
was that
a
experience?
how to put this in a nutshell. I feel like that was such a big pivotal point in my life, and like a lot changed from that experience alone. That was in 2020. He was born 2 weeks before the pandemic, so you can kind of imagine how that tracked. There was no checkups with the doctors, there was no mum groups. It was a very isolating time. Lots of other stuff was happening in the background at that time. So I think I kind of went into, I would say, probably postnatal depression with him. And I think the cesarean contributed to that a lot because I was feeling like my body didn't do what it was supposed to do naturally. And I'd always viewed birth as such an empowering experience, but for me, it didn't feel empowering at all. I felt like a failure when I left that hospital. And the recovery was rough, breastfeeding was rough, just nothing kind of came naturally. I was anxious, so I didn't really tune into my mum instincts that everybody says that you get. And it was just everything I heard about motherhood was just not what it was at the time. He only napped on me. I couldn't put him down, so I thought I was doing wrong there as well. So everything kind of just felt like I was doing the wrong thing. Now, looking back, I know that's such a normal experience. And I just wasn't fully immersed in the world of parenthood and motherhood. So I didn't really have those mums kind of telling me what to expect in those things. It was more just what I've seen and heard TV shows, and now we know that's not the right, motherhood. So I guess my experience there really led me to wanting a VBAC to have an empowering birth experience.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like how the fact that you gave birth just before, or in the pandemic, pretty much, you had your baby.
Yeah.
How much of your experience do you think was shaped around the actual mode of delivery, so emergency cesarean, versus how much support you did or did not, I guess in this case, receive in that early motherhood phase?
I think because I had him just before, like I think it was 2 weeks out, he was born on the 29th of Feb, and it was sometime early March that it hit. It didn't affect my experience too much, other than there were no, what are they, family and child health nurse checkups. That was cancelled. My first few ones of those were cancelled. But everything else, I guess, was kind of the same in terms of what you received from the hospital. They still did their first few checkups at home and all that type of stuff because that was still just outside that full lockdown period.
Mm.
But I know a lot of women's experiences are very different in terms of having to go to the hospital alone, having to go to ultrasounds alone. So I'm very thankful that I avoided that.
Yeah. And I'm always interested in this question because I think there's so much power in debriefing after birth, no matter what mode of delivery. I think the the power of debriefing. It's the right word.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really interesting question because I chatted with someone in an early podcast episode, Helen, who's a midwife, and her whole job has become the debriefing part after birth, which can really then help shape the birth experience and how we viewed the birth experience, no matter if you've had a vaginal or a caesarean birth. And I'm just always interested in when people have had a quote unquote, air quotes, bad experience. Is
Mm-hmm.
is there anything you think could have helped shape the view of that experience?
100%. I think you've said it yourself, the debrief, it is so important. But being my first, I had never even heard the word debrief.
Mm,
I didn't know what the doctors were giving me was a debrief the day after my cesarean. And that labor was so long, like over 24 hours. Then just the whirlwind that it was. And then you get such broken sleep after, such a huge experience and being so exhausted, your baby starts keeping you up. So you're not in a state to be understanding what's happened. That's when the doctor comes by your bedside. Do you understand what happened yesterday? And I'm like, I think so. Like, I don't know. Do I? Do I not? And then you just kind of say yes because, like, well, I think that's what I should say. And I guess I know a lot of women fall into like a people pleasing mode and see doctors as a kind of authority that when they're asking you questions, you just say yes, and you don't really feel like you're in an environment or a space to kind of question them back, especially when you don't understand what you're talking about. At that time, I had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't think that I would be having a cesarean. I didn't know, with the heart decels and everything that was happening, it was just all such a whirlwind. I had so many questions, but I didn't feel like I could ask them. I didn't know how to pose them. There was just so much that was so uncertain. So when they came by to do the debrief the very next day after giving birth, to me, it didn't feel like much of a debrief. They didn't give me any further information. They didn't answer any of my questions. And I, at that time, didn't know that was a debrief. And it's now only onto my third baby where I'm like, oh, okay, that's what that was. And that's how they do it. Really, they come around the day after you give birth and just say, how was that for you? Do you understand what happened? Okay, yeah, everything looks great. See you next baby if you have one.
Yeah, and you're right. Like that isn't like, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a midwife, but just between you and me, that doesn't sound like long enough for a proper birth debrief, which I I think, and again, I speak to Helen Nightingale about this, is to have that ability to have a separate, like third party where you can just
Mhm.
unleash all your emotions, all your feeling, not feel rushed. Like there's so much power in that, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a professional. It could be anyone really, but ideally someone who knows something about your particular birth experience can be really empowering. Anyway,
Yeah.
let's move
I think
on. So,
waiting a long time, long enough as well. So you've had time to process your birth.
yeah,
Otherwise, you don't really know how you feel about it. And it took me a long time to realize I had birth trauma or even admit that I had birth trauma. So I think that's one of the key points too, waiting enough time to gather the questions that you had and figure out how you feel about your birthing experience. That's when you should be getting the debrief.
it's almost like you need two debriefs, don't you? You
Yeah.
need one in that
Yeah.
early stage where you can ask questions and become more informed about your birth, and then one a little while later that you can where you can really sift through all the emotions.
Get to the emotional stuff. Yeah.
How good would that be if that was a service?
That would be awesome. I
That would be
definitely
awesome.
think we need that.
Well, yes, it is an option, but unfortunately, from what I'm aware of, it's all privately. Like you'd have to seek it out yourself and fund it yourself.
Yes, from my understanding, if you want to do it through the public system, it's always with an obstetrician or doctor as well. You don't really get the option to do it with a midwife, and they tend to
Mm.
be a little bit more, what's the word?
Less time pressures. Less time pressure.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah. Okay, so whatever happened, happened. You had your experience with the cesarean. What then? You obviously VBAC was on the agenda. What helped to shape that decision process?
I think I was very lucky enough to know that my sister, who had the first baby of the family, my older sister, had an emergency cesarean with her first, and she had already had her second, and she had already had a VBAC. And my sister-in-law had had an emergency cesarean, so I, you know, I had a little bit of an understanding. And I knew that a VBAC was an option. And I think that having my sister go down that route helped shape my decision and realize that it was possible. And we had a lot of open discussions around birth and all that type of stuff. And she's very much like me in an open book. So we really bounced off each other there. And she was such a support person for me during all of that. So the second I had my cesarean, I knew I wanted a VBAC. It was never a question. It was immediately, I'm having a VBAC. And it wasn't, I'm going to try for a VBAC. It was, I'm having one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And why? I just
Uh,
like, what was your decision behind that?
I think for me, it's what's important and how birth makes you feel. And like I said before, it was to me, birth is such an empowering experience. And I so badly wanted to experience that. I
Mm.
wanted to walk away being like, wow, I just did that. My body's amazing. And I do feel like that, of course.
Yeah,
And I do think that way of women, regardless of how you birth. It was just how I felt internally about it and my
yeah,
what I wanted for my birth experience and how I envisioned it was so the opposite that I was like,
yeah,
no, I want to get what I want and I deserve what I want. It was essentially the way I was looking at it.
yeah.
And just to feel empowered and to know that my body could do what it was designed to do. That was kind of my driving factor.
Yeah, love that. So you made the decision, this is happening. What was, what, how did you then go about that? And did you receive any kickback from hospitals, doctors? Talk us through that.
So much, so much. Um, I think it wasn't until my son was nearly 2 that I decided that I was going to start trying for another baby. So in that time, I kind of just put it to the back of my mind, too hard basket. I'm not dealing with that until I'm ready to face that like birth trauma. I knew I wanted to work through that first so I could go into my next birth with a very clear head. I knew I had some like being scared about birth. I had to work through that. So I went and got my notes in the hospital for my son's birth and I read through them. And I didn't understand any of it. So it didn't help. And then I just kind of put that aside again for another few months. And I started listening to a birth and pregnancy podcast. I started following the VBAC Australia Facebook page. That's amazing. All the women on there are so good. So I highly recommend that if you are going for a VBAC. But then I just kind of immersed myself in the world of VBAC. And then you hear all these terms and you get familiar with everything. And then I revisited my birth notes. And the second time I revisited it, I understood it. I didn't need a medical team kind of debriefing me with it. I was like, oh, I know that term now and I know what that means. And I know what this is. And then I knew where things went wrong. But it also helped me understand it from a very different perspective. It wasn't because I decided to get the epidural that he started having heart decels. It wasn't because of the decisions that I made. I realized that going into that birth, he was already having quite big heart decels before I got the epidural and all that stuff. So all that kind of blame that I carried through that period, I was able to work through that, reading through my birth notes once I had that understanding of what I was reading. Then the pushback that I got from the hospital didn't come until right at the end of my pregnancy because I went into a midwifery program. I had the same midwife throughout my pregnancy. She just wouldn't be at my birth, but they had to discharge me at 40 weeks. And I tend to have long pregnancies. I went into labor with my son at 41 and 1. I went into labor with my daughter at 41 and 5. So I went into my VBAC, my second birth, going, I want everything as natural as possible. I want to go into spontaneous labor. I don't want to be induced. I don't want a scheduled cesarean. I just knew everything that I wanted. The hospital doesn't like that because they can't control it. And if they can't control it, then they can't mitigate risk. And I think that's their focus. And that's great because that's what they're there for. If something goes wrong, they need to step in and they do need to save lives sometimes. I'm aware of that. But I also just wanted to go in and say, I'm doing this until I need you. And that's when I want you to step in. Until then, step out and just let me do what I need to do and let me listen to my own intuition. And I did a lot of inner work in terms of learning to trust my instincts throughout that period. And I think that's the number one thing that kind of helped me going into a VBAC was learning to trust my instincts. And I didn't realize I didn't know how to do that before. And I had to always lean on other people to kind of tell me what's right and wrong. I just wanted to go inward and say, how does this feel for me and my body? And what's my body telling me about this?
So how did you, the big question, like I love what you've just said, but how does one learn to trust their instincts? Easier said than done, I can imagine.
Yes, yes, it is. Well, I think just the people that I surround myself with and the things that I enjoy looking into. The podcast that I was listening to at the time was a big one for that. It was run by a midwife, and she kind of did this analogy of you're a zebra in the wild, and the wind's pushing you down to like a lion sniffing your scent, and the zebra's going to look at that lion, and is that zebra going to say, "Oh, I don't want to move in case I offend the lion's feelings," and stay there and get eaten? Or is that zebra going to say, my survival instincts are kicking in. I need to go so I can live. And I thought, oh my gosh, I really related to that in terms of how, the way I carry myself through life. And I put maybe other people's feelings above mine and focus on people pleasing instead of focusing on what I need and what I want and listening to my own instinct. And I think that that's very important in the world of birth. So that analogy alone was such like one of those pivotal shifts in my mindset, I think. And then I'm just lucky enough, my sister-in-law is a psychologist, so she's always like having these types of debriefs with her. She would feed me bits of information that helped me along the way, and being able to debrief with my sisters as well. I've got three sisters, they're all mums. They were all mums before me too. So I just had that support network around me that kind of helped me become the person that I am now.
Oh, I love that. So good. So great. Was there a moment, like you mentioned before, when you went into labor, and we're going to go into, I guess, your most recent in more detail, but I'd love to know,
Yeah.
was there a, did you have a moment, like a day in your mind where you thought, okay, enough's enough, I'm going to need to have intervention or an induction or whatever it might be? Like, was there a,
Yeah. There was. With both my previous births, I went into labor the day before my induction with my first and my second.
yeah.
Um, with my first, I was none the wiser, and I was just like, please book me in for an induction. I don't want to be pregnant anymore. It gets rough. When you go over 40 weeks, it is rough. And after 41 weeks, I was begging them, and they booked it in, and I went into labor the day before, just thank God. And then with my second, I knew 42 weeks was my personal cutoff just by the research that I've done and what I've looked into, and what can tend to happen after that 42-week mark. That's when I thought that will be my day that I want to get induced, but I still didn't want to book it in. And the closer I came to 42 weeks, again, I was just listening to my instincts, and I was saying, no, even if you do go to 42 weeks, I don't want to be induced. And I'm happy to go a little bit past that. And I thought, I'm just going to take it day by day. But it did get to a point where they were giving me regular scans, and then mentioned that the amniotic fluid was dropping quite rapidly. And I was still at a point that was safe, but they weren't happy with the drop. This is where I got scared, and I didn't know whether to listen to my instincts or listen to the doctors, because my belief is that they do tend to use fear tactics to kind of get you to where they want you. And they really wanted me to have a scheduled cesarean. They were pressuring me for that. They really broke me down in those last couple of weeks where, I'm crying at the hospital, and the head of the hospital is telling me that, if you were my wife, I would be recommending you have a scheduled cesarean. And there's all of those, the wording that they use that's not really appropriate, that kind of does just chip away your confidence and your belief in yourself. And he was telling me that I was being brought up in their head of meeting with the hospital staff, and how all of the obstetricians were saying, what do we do if we're on and she presents in labor? I don't feel confident to look after her. That was the one thing I think that broke me down, because I then felt unsafe. I didn't feel safe going and birthing in that hospital. And that's the day where I started to question whether I need to be induced, or whether I do just go for a scheduled cesarean. And, maybe the amniotic fluids are getting too low. Maybe I am being too risky now. And that all kind of played into those decisions. So I did end up booking in an induction for the following day. And I went into labor that night.
Hmm. And so you had the doctors suggesting, booking for induction. Were your midwives on board with that too? Like, what were they saying?
No, the midwives were so beautiful and so lovely, and they would all come and whisper after the doctor left, like, "You've got this. You're amazing. You know what you're doing. Listen to yourself. You can do this. We're all so proud of you." Like, we don't come by women that often that want to go into spontaneous labor, and they were just such a good support team, and I think they really kept me going through that time.
And what were their views about the amniotic fluid that was reducing?
The midwife that I had on that particular day, because you're in the public system, they're changing all the time.
Hmm.
She had said, "Yeah, look, I think if I were you, I'd be going in for the induction." And that
Mm.
was also weighing heavily on my mind. And then I done a post in the VBAC Australia Facebook page, and they were all like, "No, this is still a normal level. Why are they pushing you? Just ask more
Yeah.
questions." And they really helped me to kind of be like, okay, I do need to ask more questions so I can feel comfortable with the decision. Whether I go for an induction or not, what's my body telling me? My body's telling me I don't know enough. So then I needed to ask more questions, and they helped me kind of gather the questions that I needed to ask. So I spoke with an obstetrician, and she was really lovely, and she helped talk me through everything and why they were thinking it was too low and the drops that had happened, et cetera, et cetera. And after my discussion with her, I decided, yeah, that's when I'm going for the induction. And now I feel confident with that decision and comfortable.
Love what you just said. So initially you were feeling unsure I'm just trying to clarify what you were saying
Yes,
in my mind, so correct me if I'm wrong. But initially in the piece, you were feeling really unsure. There were people suggesting that you do something that your mind hadn't yet reconciled with because you didn't have the knowledge yet. And so it was a bit
yes,
scary. You're being told to have an induction. Other people are saying, no, don't, no, don't. So you've
yes.
got these two polar opposites. And then once you found out the questions to ask and you sat down with a medical professional who was able to answer all your questions, then you felt reconciled with the right decision. Did I
Yes.
summarize that? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And that's like pretty much my basis for going into birth is you need to feel informed. Otherwise, you're going to walk away with questions about what happened.
Yeah.
I want to know what's happening going in, and I want to feel informed, and I want to feel like I've got knowledge. And I think that's so important, informed consent.
Yes, absolutely. Informed consent, because that is also, and again, correct me if I'm speaking out of turn because I'm making an assumption for you. But if you'd had that informed consent, like, okay, let me preface this. I am pro vaginal birth. I am pro caesarean birth. I am pro the woman being in control and having a brilliant, beautiful experience. And I believe in my bones, and like that can happen with any mode of delivery. So
Agreed.
I'm wondering if you'd had that informed consent and that knowledge and all that, which you don't know what you don't know, right? And you hadn't expected to have an emergency cesarean. And like, it's no fault of you or it was just the situation that you were presented with at the time. But I'm wondering, I guess the reason I just want to say this is I'm so glad you got that piece of booking in the induction and you were at peace with it, because if someone's listening today and they're thinking, oh, I'm going to have a cesarean, I just want them also to understand that there is potential for them to feel at peace with their mode of delivery. So if you're listening to this podcast, we're hearing Tenae's personal story about a VBAC, and that's amazing. She's the experience she's describing, but I like to say that because sometimes people like contact me later and say, "Oh, you were so pro VBAC and I had emergency cesarean or an elective," and I'm like, "That's
Absolutely.
amazing!" Like, yeah,
Yes. I think it's a very important part as well. Part of for me, for my VBAC journey, I needed to understand my cesarean because if it happened again, I knew that I would regret not trying the VBAC, but I could still be okay with the outcome of an emergency cesarean. I didn't want to walk away feeling the way I did the first time. So I knew it was an option. I knew it was a possibility that it would happen. I just knew that I would regret not trying.
yeah.
So you have to always do what's right for you and what's your body telling you. And I just thought I'd rather be induced and try for a vaginal birth rather than scheduling that cesarean. But yes, it's always a possibility that it could end in that emergency again. And whether you want the chaos of that or
Mm.
whether you'll be at peace with that, it's just something that you can only decide for yourself and what's right for your circumstances.
So my next question, and this is this is a bit of a different, but different birth story to usual, the way it progresses. But you had a lot of foresight and forethought about the mode of delivery. And so you then spontaneously went into labor. And again, would love to hear that story. But did you have in your mind at any stage, at what stage during this labor were you then happy to proceed with an emergency cesarean, or were you happy to um, do what it takes as long to get that emergency, that
Is
VBAC?
this for my VBAC, my first VBAC?
Yeah, well, I guess for
Yeah.
either, like, did you have a point in your mind where you're like, no, I'll be really happy with an emergency cesarean, or were you like, no, I'm happy to go for this VBAC, even if it means, for example, having an instrumental delivery?
I had an instrumental delivery. So that was a choice of mine as well. And that's how
Yep.
that ended. For me, I think the only thing I was questioning that I would have a cesarean over would be forceps. Again, my sister ended up with a forceps delivery for her first VBAC. And I do know how brutal they can be and how much they can destroy your pelvic floor. And yeah, it's just from my experience, that's when I thought, oh, okay, maybe I would opt for the cesarean over that. However, I was happy to try the vacuum. I did get an episiotomy. And all of that happened in theatre while I was being rushed for the emergency cesarean due to the heart decels again. So for me to answer that question was I'm happy to go and try as much as I can until I can't anymore, until they tell me we need to get this baby out and it's coming out by cesarean. That was my call for when I'd be happy for the cesarean up until the point when it's needed. And if baby's safe and mum's safe, it's not happening.
Okay. Yep.
So when it was needed is when I agreed to it. Rushed
Yep.
into theatre. The epidural started wearing off, and they were talking about a spinal block for having to put me under. Pardon me. And that obstetrician that I'd spoken to, who kind of talked me through the induction process, happened to be there, and I was like, oh, thank God. She just made me feel comfortable and safe, and I think that is so important in the birth space. And she looked at me and I said, like, what's happening? Like, I don't want to be put under. I want to try. Can we try the vacuum? And then she just spoke to me, and she was my voice, and she was what I needed in that moment. She's like, everybody stop. The baby's fine. Like, the heart rate's picked back up. How about let's try the vacuum? Are you happy with that? I was like, yes, like, let's do that, because otherwise I think they were preparing to put me under in that moment. And that's just not what I personally wanted. So she became my voice, and then it was one push with the vacuum and the episiotomy, and my daughter was born, and she was fine and healthy and happy and crying, and yeah.
Beautiful. And you're talking about your most recent birth. Yeah.
No, that was my middle. That was my first feedback.
This often happens with birth stories with mums with multiple kids. We
It's
lose
just right
track.
everywhere. Yes, but quite a similar experience with my son.
Okay, so let's fast forward to your most recent bub, who's now 6 months old.
Yeah.
Is this the one where you went into spontaneous delivery the day before induction?
No,
Oh,
this one I had no induction booked, and I was in the 41st week with the other two. This little guy came at 40 weeks and 3 days, so I was not expecting it. I was fully prepared to go to 42 weeks,
okay.
and I disregarded my due date, and I thought I'm not even going to tell people because I know I'm going at 42 weeks. Like, that's just how my body does pregnancy.
Yeah.
So it was a big shock when he came at 40 weeks and 3 days it was I went into labor.
And how did you know you're in labor?
Oh, yeah, I'll say that annoying answer. You just know. I was having contractions on and off for, I think, the previous 3 days, and I kept going, and I thought, oh my God, I think this is it. Oh no, and I just wasn't ready because, again, in my mind, I was not. I'm 42 weeks, and I've got up until 42 weeks to prepare everything. I hadn't packed my hospital bag. I was just third baby. This time, everything's kind of done later. So every night, I started to have contractions. They weren't like some hicks; they were painful, and they were methodical, and they were coming, at 10 minutes apart, 5 minutes apart. And every night, I was like, please not tonight. I'm not ready. And then they would fizzle out. And I was like, yes, they fizzled out. I was just, I don't know what headspace I was in. I was just not in the headspace to go through all that pain again yet. And I thought, no, I can't keep doing this. I need to get ready to give birth. That day, I had my husband take the other two kids out of the house. I done a face mask. I'd done my brows. I'd done my lashes. I think I'd done my 10, all the important stuff. But while I was doing that, I put on my birth and pregnancy podcast, and they were talking about the importance of oxytocin and just the good feel good hormones to believe in yourself and have that strong good environment and all of that type of good stuff. And that shifted me, and I was like, yeah, okay, no, now I remember I can do this.
Yeah.
And I had a nice day. That evening, I packed the bag, I organized my bedroom, and I started dusting the blinds and doing all that crazy stuff like nesting over 40 weeks. Strange. But I knew I had to dust my bedroom. I had to prepare it. I had to make sure everything was good for baby who, decided they were going to kickstart labor at 2 a.m. that night. So yeah, it all kind of happened just when I had my mental shift of, no, I'm ready now.
Yeah, right. And in terms, you got two other children in the house. How did you navigate getting into the hospital? What was, the process there?
I'm lucky enough to have my mum live very close, and I knew I'd be calling her. So she just came, and the other two were thankfully asleep. 2 a.m. You hope they are. Yeah, they were asleep, and she came and she slept in my spare room, and they slept through the night. So that all went fine. And I'm grateful that I didn't go into labor while I was still awake, because, my older one's 5, so he could understand, and he was very anxiously awaiting the arrival of his brother.
And were you feeling more relaxed considering you'd already had a VBAC?
No.
Oh,
I held a lot of unexpected fear during this pregnancy, and I just kept saying, I don't know where it's coming from. And now looking back, okay, maybe I had some unprocessed, I don't want to call it trauma, but unprocessed fear maybe from how my last birth unfolded. And it didn't go as like the textbook feedback, like, yeah, I had a VBAC, but it was also chaotic, and it was also rushy. And I, had those moments of like, is my baby going to make it? So it's like, it was very, there was still a lot of fear there. I don't know how else to describe it. And I didn't really know how to work through it, but I also didn't really have time to work through it. I was working, and I had 2 little kids at home, and pregnancy was kind of hard for the third time around, taking a toll on my body, and just I wasn't prioritizing myself at that time. And I just held on to fear a lot of the pregnancy, which is why I feel like I wasn't ready up until that final day, where I thought, well, I've got no option now. I need to be ready. And I know I can't go into birth in this headspace, and I need to believe in myself, and kind of just had that mindset shift. I reminded myself of the birth that I've always dreamed of and the birth that I wanted. And again, I didn't get my dream birth, but that's totally okay. Everyone has their own story.
okay. So you're heading to hospital at about 2 a.m. Talk us through what happened.
So I headed into hospital, I think it was about 6 a.m. I labored at home for a little bit. Contractions were 10 minutes apart. Quickly jumped to 5 minutes apart, then I was 3 minutes apart. And I thought, third baby, 3 minutes. I think we should get going. And I'd heard so many stories about people saying the third baby was going to come in the car because, your body just knows what it's doing and it goes quicker. Not in my case, I'll say that I labour long. Got to the hospital, they put me in the little assessment room, and they're like, yeah, okay, good, strong contractions. You're happy to stay. Let's put the monitors on and all of that stuff. And I had a really lovely midwife, but then she done a changeover. And the next midwife that came in was pressuring me for stuff I didn't want to. Let's put the cannula in just in case, an emergency cesarean. I was like, I don't want the talk of that. I already said I don't want a cannula. I don't want to discuss an emergency cesarean unless it's necessary, all that type of stuff. So she was really just disregarding my birth plan and being very pushy. So I very easily shifted mindsets, which was not great, but I started to go into, all right, I also have to fight for what I want now. I don't have someone who's respecting my boundaries. I have to be in the fight state, and that's not a good state to be in when you need to be in this beautiful birth space to kind of have that oxytocin flow and progress things. Finally got put into a room. I wanted a water birth. I really always wanted a water birth. I think they're the most beautiful things ever. And the rooms with the baths weren't available. So I got put in a very tiny little room. It was not the same room I was in with my daughter. So I was picturing my beautiful birth in this beautiful space, and that was not it. So that kind of also shifted my mindset a little bit. And I started to think like, oh, can I do this? I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I want to do this. And the fear started taking over. Then this midwife kept coming in, and she would just hang around. She was watching me. And you don't want to feel watched in labor. You need to have your space be unwatched. You need to feel safe. I just wanted my husband there, quiet, peace. She kept coming in and just staying and like looking at me. And I'm like, why are you watching me right now? I felt very uncomfortable. And she was like, and I didn't want any vaginal examinations. So she was coming in, is it time for an exam yet? I was like, no, not yet. And she was like, okay, well, your contractions are still 5 minutes apart because, of course, once I got to the hospital, they'd slowed down, but they were still strong and intense. And I felt like they were doing something. They just remained 5 minutes apart. And every time I'd sit down to rest, they would jump to maybe 7 minutes apart and get a bit longer. And every time I stood up, they would come closer together again. So she kept coming in, checking the track and go, oh, you were resting. And I'm like, yeah, well, I felt like I needed to rest. Like we have to listen to our body in these moments. And then I kind of felt like, oh no, I have to get up. I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm not allowed to rest. You know, the kind of feeling she was giving me was overall not good. She said the doctor needed to come in and talk to me. I said, that's fine. I did request no doctors up until the point where it was needed. I only wanted midwives in the room, but she kind of pressured me to have a doctor come in and talk to me. So I agreed. She spoke to me about having a cannula inserted maybe about 6 times, even though I kept saying no. And then when the doctor came in, they wheeled in an ultrasound machine with them. And I was like, why? And they said, oh, because you didn't have your 3rd trimester scan, because my last scan was the 20-week scan. I didn't want to do a growth scan. Again, I have big babies. I knew I was going to have big babies. And sometimes that's a tactic they use. Your baby's going to be big. We need to induce you early. I wanted to avoid all of that. So I said no to the growth scans. And I just trusted that my body would birth the baby that it grew. And if not, then yeah, we would cross that bridge when we got to it. So they randomly brought in an ultrasound machine, which kind of, again, made me feel uncomfortable. They didn't ask me first, and they just wanted to make sure that baby's head was down. But in every appointment, they could feel baby's head was down. She could feel baby's head was down. It was just a bit odd to me, but again, I agreed. I was like, okay, you're just checking that baby's head's down and nothing else. So I said yes to that. And it was the conversation about the cannula again. I denied it again. And she left, and she just kept doing that, kind of coming back. Like, well, you know, we've got to get this moving along. My shift's ending soon. And I remember her coming in about 11 a.m. At that point, and my contractions were still 5 minutes apart. She's like, I'd really like them closer together. And she kept just saying things like that, like what she would want and what she would like. And it was chipping away at me slowly each time she came in, each time she watched me, each time she made comments. I felt like, okay, my labor's not progressing the way that it should be. So at that point at 11 a.m. I caved and I said, all right, let's do an exam. I'm curious. And I didn't want an exam for the fact of if I wasn't as far along as I thought I should be, that I would get disheartened. And she said I was 5 centimeters at that point, very stretchy and favorable and all of that stuff. And she's like, oh, you're further along than what I thought you were. And then she left and she came back, I think, 1 o'clock, and then was saying again, oh, I'd really like your contractions closer together. And I was like, well, I don't. They're painful enough. I'm enjoying the rest in between. I think my labor's progressing enough, and I like them 5 minutes apart. We don't need to make them closer together. And then she was like, so what's the plan? And I was like, what do you mean, what's the plan? Like, I'm just laboring. And she's like, are you going to get an epidural? Like, we kind of need to know. I like a plan. And I was like, but I just want to see how things go. So I'm happy to just labor as I am naturally. No, I don't want an epidural right now. If it happens, it happens. She's like, oh, I don't like that. I need a plan. And I was just, well, my body was screaming at me at this point. I was so uncomfortable. And I just kept saying, well, yeah, I don't have a plan. I just want to see how things go. And I'm happy to just try and go naturally. And then she would keep coming back in probably every hour at that point. And I think it was about the 4 p.m. or 2 p.m. or something along those lines. She wanted to do another exam. And I was like, okay, sure. And I was 7 centimeters. At that point, after that exam, my contractions really intensified. They became a lot more painful, a lot more unbearable, and a lot closer together. I was doubling contractions then. While I was in the middle of my contractions doubling, she was saying to my husband, oh, I gave her a little twizzle while I was in there. And I had already told her, I do not want to stretch and sleep. I only want an exam. You can see how far along I am, but do not give me anything further. And no, she did. She gave me a stretch or a slit. I don't know what she did, but she was calling it a twizzle. And she's like, oh, the contractions are closer together now. That's from my magic fingers. She was telling my husband while I was in the middle of a contraction and couldn't speak. And I was just sitting there and I just had anger bubbling up. I was like, you did what? You didn't ask me. I didn't give you consent for that. And then she said she'd done it both times. And then she was really happy with herself that my contractions were now where she wanted them to be, and they were closer together. But if I was already 7 centimeters at that point, my body was clearly doing what it needed to. And it was doing it at a pace that my body needed it to, that was still allowing me to rest. And I was doing great. I was laboring great. And I felt so comfortable with where I was, despite her audience. So at that point, everything took a turn. And again, fear came over. I was getting really angry and I couldn't find my words. Like, what did you do to me? Like, I didn't give you consent to do that. And then she started again. So do you want the epidural? For someone who's going into birth not wanting the epidural, and that was specifically on my birth plan, and wanting a natural birth and wanting an unmedicated birth, I don't know why I was offered the epidural so much and so many times. It is dangling the fruit in front of my face at that point. And I was still able to manage my contractions, but I feel like her offering it to me so many times made me go, sure, I'll get the epidural. I don't know how bad this is going to get. It's starting to get worse. My contractions were doubling. I was not getting any more breaks. And then I said, yeah, you know what? Give me the epidural. So that happened by the time the anesthesiologist, I don't even know how to say that one, came in to give me the epidural. I was in a lot of pain and I was getting not even a minute break between contractions. They were just one after the other. I was definitely in transition. I don't know how much of that was her, what she labeled a twizzle. That word kind of just gives me a yuck feeling now, or how much of that was just me going through transition. But I do feel like she altered my labor from that point forward because my contractions were, a decent length apart, and then there was just no breaks. And that's when I thought, all right, no, I can't do this. I can't even breathe at this point. And then the epidural failed. So that's something I never thought would happen to me. I knew it would happen in some rare circumstances, but it's not something I ever planned for. I just thought, all right, I've gotten into the headspace and now I need pain relief. And that pain relief didn't come. So I think I got into a bad headspace of no longer thinking I can do this. I was, no. What do you mean it's not working? I need pain relief. So they left the room for 10, 20 minutes and came back to see, is it working yet, doing ice tests and all of that stuff. And I was still having very intense contractions, didn't take away the pain at all. So then they decided they were going to try and redo it. They gave me the option to redo it or just leave it as is. And my husband was like, no, Tenae, you can do this. Like, he was being a great sport. He knew what I wanted. He's like, you didn't even want the epidural anyway. You can do this. And I was like, no, I can't. Typical. So they checked me at that time. They said 2 hours had gone past between fiddling with the epidural, and they checked me and said I'm 10 centimeters. And they said that baby's head was quite up still. So do you want us to try and redo the epidural, or do you want to leave it? I wish I said leave it, but I was in a very different headspace and I said, no, let's try and redo it. Tried to redo it. It failed again. And at that point, there was so many team members in. They were trying to troubleshoot, figure out what was going wrong with the epidural. And it was, again, very watched. And if you've given birth and you've had an epidural, you know that you've got to stay so still through the worst contractions of your life. And it is very, very, very hard to do. So that was probably the worst part of my whole labor. And now I'm like, well, why was I even doing it then? But they tried to then move it. They said, all right, we'll pull it down a bit, put it lower, and maybe it'll work. So there was a third time they tried, didn't work. Then they gave me a stronger drug, still didn't work. But then baby's heart rate started to drop. I don't know if that was because of the stronger epidural they put in, but the midwife seemed to think that would have something to do with it. But the heart decels began, the monitor was no longer picking him up. They were getting out the handheld Doppler, and then they said they wanted to put the scalp monitor on, which is not something I wanted. I had with my 2 previous births. But at that point, they were not able to pick up a heart rate. So I said, I agreed and yeah, let's put it on. I think that also was not picking up much. It was a very faint heartbeat. And they said, but his head was right there. He was like ready to come, ready to push. I just don't think he was strong enough in that moment. So they said, no, sorry, it's going to be an emergency cesarean. I was like, oh, again, we're here again. I just really, really wanted a straightforward birth. I really wanted a birth in the birthing suite. I didn't want to go to theatre. Yeah, I didn't want any of that, but it was happening. And throughout these contractions, like turn to your right side, turn to your left side, trying to get that heartbeat back up and healthy. And I was just, I don't even know, in a different planet, really. Just immersed in pain. I really allowed myself to become immersed in that pain. And then I thought, oh, if they take me for a cesarean, they're going to have to put me under because the epidural is not working and my pain will go away. And I thought, great, all right, let's just do that. I was in such a different headspace to where I wanted to be. And then I think just one of the midwives spoke up and she said, what if we just try and push? The baby's right there. Let's just give it all we got. Let's just try and push. And the doctor agreed. I couldn't find my words in that moment. I think my husband was saying the same thing, but I don't know. It was so chaotic that I don't even remember. I just know one midwife had spoken up and said that. And I gave it a push. His head, he was crowning. And then the doctor said, I'm going to cut you. And I said, do you have to? And she goes, yep. And I said, okay. And next contraction, he was born. And that was that.
Wow. How did you
Yeah,
feel?
a lot.
Yeah. And how did you feel emotionally after that experience?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I don't even know. It was so chaotic. I think the fear and the adrenaline just goes so sky high that you can't really sift through how you're feeling in that moment. But immediately I was met with that oxytocin rush and I was just do whatever. I've got my baby's on my chest. I'm the happiest person in the world. And it all just went away. I didn't care what else was happening or who else was in the room. I was in my little bubble and I stayed in my bubble for such a long time. And that was an experience that I didn't receive with the other two. I didn't really have that oxytocin rush and that immediate bond. I was a bit like, oh, I love my baby, love your baby no matter what. And but it was a bit more of a delayed experience of I was so focused on everything else going on around me that I couldn't really focus on my baby. But this time it was just my baby was all that I seen and that was all that I felt. And I just really had that oxytocin peak and it was so beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. In terms of your recovery, I'm aware of your time. And I feel like I could talk to you for another hour, but I will try to put the brakes on. In terms of
So I can
your,
talk and talk and talk.
I love it.
I will do.
It's so good. But in terms of your recovery, you've had one cesarean, which is major abdominal surgery. You've had two vaginal births with instrumental delivery. Talk me through your recovery physically.
Um, with the cesarean, that was just hectic. I had to live on painkillers. It was not nice, and that's kind of a driving factor of not wanting that again. With the instrumental birth, I found that surprisingly difficult and surprisingly painful. I just thought vaginal birth would be so much easier than a cesarean automatically, and it wasn't. And the stitches, they just hurt so much. I can't describe it. It felt like there was a nerve that was pinched that shouldn't have been pinched or something like that. That hurt a lot. And that took kind of the week or two to stop being in such intense pain with the instrumental birth. And then this third time round, I did get an episiotomy. I did have the stitches again, but it was so much easier this time. And the recovery was a lot easier. It was just Panadol and Nurofen, a couple of ice packs. It was probably more sore for the first 3 days, but by the time a week had passed, I was really up and about and feeling normal again. 2 weeks, once the stitches had dissolved, it was a non-issue, really. And
Yeah,
then 3 weeks, I was, oh, did I even give birth?
you're right.
Yeah,
So
it was
no
great.
like pelvic heaviness, like prolapse symptoms, that sort of
Well, yes, 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 I did have that.
after
I
your
didn't
third
have
or second.
incontinence with both.
Okay.
But with the third, I think my like pelvic floor symptoms were more intense. I had a lot of heaviness there, a lot of pain in terms of that, a lot of lower back pain. Um, Going to the bathroom was not the easiest. That was painful. I just knew there was something not right and that I was having probably a prolapse. And then when I went to my GP for, I think it was the 1 week or the 6 week checkup, I was also due for a cervical screening. So she'd had a look at everything, and then she looked in there and she goes, "Oh, you've got a uterine prolapse." And I thought, okay, yeah, that checks out with the symptoms I'm experiencing and how I'm feeling. But in between that time, I was on the Fitness Mama program and doing those exercises for early days. I never done that before with my previous two. I thought you had to wait to the 6 week point, but I was really jumping on from that 0 to 1 week to 3 weeks. And I love how that's all laid out for you, mapped out for you, so you don't really have to think about it. And it was just starting with that deep belly breathing and um, I think you put it as finding the connection between your body and breath again and all of that. I love it. I loved all of it and it helps me a lot. Um, my son decided to pop in. But yeah, started gentle with the belly breathing with your program. And I think that's done a great job for me. And I don't experience any more heaviness. I don't have any problem using the bathroom. It's just sometimes I'll get a bit of lower back pain, which I think might be linked to the prolapse still.
Okay.
But I think that's going to be a lot of core rebuilding.
Yeah. Um, that's amazing that you've had such, I guess, great recovery. And for anyone listening, sometimes we can get diagnosed with a prolapse, but and as you had, it needs to be symptomatic as well as structural. So just because like our cervix or uterus sitting a little bit lower, like in your case, doesn't necessarily, and they have adjusted the guidelines for prolapse. So in order to be diagnose prolapse, it needs to be symptomatic and structurally there. So if you don't have symptoms anymore, then theoretically you no longer have a prolapse. So that was that early postpartum recovery
Right.
where you had that normal like movement in the pelvic organs, and that's why I love that. I feel that first 6 months recovery is so vital to our
Yeah.
long-term pelvic health. And I know I'm more conservative than a lot of people out there, but it's that first 6, 12, 6 weeks onwards where you get that natural recovery of the soft tissue, the connective tissue. And you could be the strongest woman in the world, but if you just had a vaginal birth, your pelvic floor is stretched 300%. And it's not just that muscle, it's the fascia, it's the connective tissue. And we can't, that's where we need to really support our recovery in terms of not doing too much too soon, building on those foundations and all the things that you've done. So well done with
Yes.
your
Yeah, I really
prioritizing.
tried to be careful this time round. I was trying not to pick up my toddler. She's like 16 kilos. So I was,
Yeah.
trying to be mindful of all of that. Just a second, darling. I
Yeah.
really didn't want to damage my pelvic
Yeah.
floor further than what I felt it was. But it's really interesting stuff because I haven't looked into that as much as I have with everything else. So
Yeah.
I was kind of when the doctor told me I have a uterine prolapse, I was like, well, what level? When I got home, I started Googling. I'm like, oh, there's different levels. What level am I?
Yeah.
Will I need surgery? What's going on?
Mm.
And again, I walked away with lots of questions. So yeah, it's good to hear your take on everything. And then knowing that the symptoms are going away, that's a good sign to recovery and that, no, I'm not going to need surgery.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting because the more research we get, the less I'm pathologizing it because we all have a degree of movement within our pelvic organs, and
Yeah.
postpartum, that increased movement is normal to a certain degree. So we don't want to over pathologize something that's actually just part of your postpartum healing. And we just need to support
Yeah.
it rather than diagnosing it and giving it a name that you then Google and it creates fear and stop
Right.
moving. And anyway, Tanae, as I said, we could talk for another hour. I'm aware of your time. You've got little humans coming into
He's
your
popping his
room.
head in
So
now.
I know my time is up. Thank you so much for I guess, yeah, sharing your story. And I know it's such a personal experience, and I really value you taking the time out today to share your amazing story. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and giving me the platform to share because I do really enjoy it and I really enjoyed my time talking with you. So thank you.
For those who'd love to connect, how can they find you?
I am mainly on Instagram, Tenae Adam Titch. Probably just have to spell that somewhere. I'm on TikTok too, but I don't really
Yeah.
use that as much. But yeah, Instagram, I love to share. I love to share all things motherhood. I love to get deep and personal because I do feel like sometimes motherhood can be an isolating experience like it was with my first. So just having people on there that kind of normalize the things that should be normalized, I'd like to do that now.
And I love how you keep it real. So I'll put all the links, yeah, to Instagram in the show notes.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Tenae.
See you later.
Thanks for listening to the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast brought to you by Fitness Mama, your app for home-based, physio-led pregnancy and postnatal workouts. If you found this episode helpful, please tap follow, leave a quick review and share it to your stories. Tag at cathbequee.physio. I'd love to connect and cheer you on. And don't forget to check out the free trial at fitnessmama.com/free to start feeling confident, strong, and supported today. Until next time, remember, a strong body, a confident birth, and empowered recovery is something you deserve. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for individual medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please consult your healthcare provider for your personalised guidance.